You were born in Bahia Blanca, Argentina, and you wrote your first poem when you were 9, a poem, 3 stanzas about the rebirth of spring, a poem that was illustrated by your brother. So my first question is, did you have a childhood in the arts, and you always knew you were a poet?
I had a childhood in the arts. My mom is an artist. She's a painter. You can see her collaborating with me in my books. And I started writing very young, and my mom encouraged that. But I went with her to her, my mom traveled to Buenos Aires, the capital city, with her paintings every 2 months, every month, to show them to her maestro. He could tell you, how is your health today? How are you feeling today? And he was meaning your work, right? And then he could have a critique of your work, but it was mostly about how to be true to yourself. How not to, go with fashion. And so I learned all I could have learned about being an artist or a poet myself by seeing all these painters in action and reacting. I didn't go to any writing workshop myself after that.
I was going to say that was going to this studio was like going to a poetry workshop or a writing workshop.
Yeah.
You went to the university in your hometown in Bahia Blanca, and you were active in the Peronist youth movement, La Juventud Universitaria Peronista. If you could give us like a little photograph of that time, how do you see yourself in those university years?
Since the moment I was born until I entered college, there had not been free elections in my country. So this was a moment like the 60s here, except with more political direction, clear political direction. Here it was organizing the youth, like protesting and demanding change. But there was, and that's why I was involved with the Peronist movement, which my family was totally anti-Peronist. It's very hard to understand how the Argentine politics go. But so there was a lot of excitement, a lot of participation by the youth who had not seen democracy. So you would be like trying to be in class, and a whole bunch of youngsters would come and say, okay, let's leave these classrooms. We are going to demonstrate in support of this and that issue. Okay. So it was a time of participating in social change.
It was very active.
Very active until the coup happened.
Yeah. On January 77 is when you were detained and you were brought to a secret concentration camp in Bahia Blanca, La Escuelita. And you describe that in your writing. You said that you were constantly hungry and constant state of stress, blindfolded in an atmosphere of violence. You became disappeared, una desaparecida, one of Argentina's 30,000. For a while, you were not allowed to write. You couldn't write. And then at one moment, I don't know if you were transferred to another location, but at one point you could write. You had pen and paper, and you couldn't write what was happening to you at the moment, but you wrote the poems you remembered, and that was is this the birth of the book, The Revenge of the Apple, La Venganza de la Manzana?
I published Revenge in 1992, and then in 2010, I recovered the stuff that I wrote in that prison. And I realized that memory is very tricky. I had written stuff there, and I had totally forgotten about it. So I did remember all these poems, but I also have some poems about
What was happening in the moment?
Yeah, about my feelings of that then. And they were very censored. I mean, it was about Jesus walking on my nightstand, and but I was saying other things. Actually, I wanted to share with you this vignette in the book, The Little School, where I'm actually reciting poetry to an audience.
Oh.
Because we were all blindfolded in this place, and I hadn't thought about that being really the first time sharing. I mean, except for one time that I won an award when I was like 10.
In your work, there are like two aspects. One is the writing itself, but also the visibility of the work. Like it's not enough to write, but you have to make it public. You have to say it.
Yeah,
there's a revolutionary aspect of the publication of poetry, I think. So go ahead and read that section.
Okay. This vignette poetry starts with a quote from Gabriel Celaya. From Poetry is a Weapon Loaded with Future. I curse the poetry of those who do not take sides. I'm not going to read a whole vignette, but just as a couple of excerpts. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts. The Prisoner's Small Room, Noontime. The new prisoners lie stretched out on the floor. They were brought in yesterday and they haven't been badly beaten yet. Chemame allows us to talk all morning long. Chemame says that the other guards want to take it out on him because he's easy on us. He claims he let Graciela, Vasca's sister, write a letter to her family and that he himself mailed it. Why don't you recite a poem? The whisper rises from the floor by my bunk bed. Little Alicia writes poems. Daniel illustrates them. My mom said proudly, I was 9 years old then. When I was a small girl, I wrote poems about the plants and birds. When I turned 12 or 13, I began writing about my sorrows. Now I can't even do that. I comfort myself by thinking that my reason for not writing is lack of paper and pencil. But the real reason is this anesthetic inside. When the flesh of poetry is anesthetized, it is impossible to build poems. Lifelong companion, eyes of melted brown sugar, warm skin at dawn, I'll tell you of my deep love. Lifelong companion, together we sailed to a port, together we sowed an orchard, from sunrise to sunset, from March to March, and I hope together we find the port, together we harvest the orchard, then I'll tell you of my deep love. I didn't know you wrote poems, whispers Vasca. We hear the engine of the truck, which freezes us for a few minutes. The noise is fading. The guards might be on their way to Army headquarters to pick up lunch. My thoughts move from poetry to lunch and back. I remember the poem I wrote when the Naposta stream was closed in and channeled underground. I know Vasca would like it. We used to walk along that stream together. The interrogation room, noontime. Are you going to tell us who your wife wrote this for? His eyes infected, he tries to read from the old notebook that still has the smell of his home. She wrote it remembering the Naposta stream. When he talks, his tongue aches from the wounds. Don't lie to us. Sir, I'm telling you the truth. She wrote the poem about that stream near our house. If you keep on telling lies, we'll take you to the machine. Sir, I'm not lying. She wrote it when they channeled the stream underground. Bullshit. I know that poem was written to honor some fucking gorilla. Get the electric prod ready. The prisoner's small room, early afternoon. I was furious too when they channeled the stream. So many times I had made love under those trees, says the new prisoner who's lying next to my bed. I hear the iron grate open. Out comes the metallic sound of the soup pan that a guard slides along the floor of the other room. Meanwhile, Sorzal enters our room to untie our hands so we can eat. He discovers that the other new prisoner has a loose blindfold and he punches him. When I hear the muffled moan, I feel guilty. Instead of reciting poems, I should have explained to the new prisoners. I should have told them that at the little school we're bitten whenever our blindfolds are loose.
Was your poetry ever brought as a document for a trial?
Well, this book, The Little School, was evidence in the... I thought when the prosecutor he wrote to me and asked to introduce it as evidence, I thought he was nuts. Because, how could you? And then it was truly useful because there are things that I'm saying there that other witnesses were not remembering.
Because the book has the vignettes, I think Julia Alvarez calls them epiphanies.
Yeah.
It's like 20 segments,
Yeah.
and then you have another section with more historical documentation.
Yeah.
There's one poem I would like you to read from The Revenge of the Apple. It's called Confession.
A falta de otros bienes, llevo a cuestas mis más viejos poemas. Ellos suplen las cosas y las gentes que me arrancó la lucha despareja. Confession. As I have no other belongings, I carry my oldest poems over my back. They make up for the things, for the people, that an uneven struggle took from me. Torn, wrinkled, I smooth them out on new sheets of paper, and they come to tell me stories that don't even have a moral. Today, I want to confess to you, my friend, I'm no longer a poet. I'm an embalmer of poetry. As I have no other belongings, I'm walking with my corpses over my back.
I have one question about La Escuelita, the Little School. That was, as you said, it was published in 1986, I believe. How do you establish the tone? Not being too tragic, because there is humor, there's tragedy, humor. Was it easy for you? Did it come naturally, or do you have to fight to find the right tone?
I'm a poet, so this is an elegy to my friends who did not survive. It's an elegy. I had written a lot of testimonies, and I was desperate because people would not read them because they were too painful to read.
Okay.
And so I wanted people to read. I'm also a lazy writer, so whatever I write, I want people to read. So that drove me. I wrote this, most of it sitting as a receptionist, working as a receptionist.
Really?
Those times there was no computer, there were no email, there was no Facebook to distract me. Okay. There was not.
You had no escape.
I was sitting there opening doors for people at an embassy and just trying to get whatever all my 17 bosses needed from me. And I was writing, and then I took a week of vacation, and I finished polishing it. You
do some code switching in your poems, but I believe that you write directly in Spanish.
I do, and now I've started to use English, and that is after I translated Gail Ronsky's work. My work was influenced also by it. English helps me when I tell the story, and it helps me to detach a bit from the trauma of all this. Yes. But also translating other people's work, and you probably experienced that yourself, has influenced my work. So translating Gail Ronsky's work, my poems became a bit more philosophical, more humor in them, because I had some humor in my prose, but I couldn't. There was no way I could have that in my poetry. My poetry was a place of a lot of drama, right? The trauma was when I was a child. When I had a big conflict in my life, I would write 3 poems. By the third one, I was like back. Right, myself.
You need to process the passion through poetry.
That's how.
Translation is a big part of your literary career. You have translated Gail Vronsky you have been translated by Gelvronsky. I think
it's
Volando Bajito and also Fuegos Florales.
Yeah.
Both of them has been by, and also you have translated a libretto for an opera.
Yes,
by
Kate Gale.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also for the anthology You Can't Drown the Fire. You have done translation for many women. When I read either La Escuelita or your poetry books, there is a sense of immediacy. Your poems are intelligent, but they are not intellectualized, and it's what's happening is happening really in front of you. And I wonder if that is connected to storytelling and to the oral tradition, either in your childhood or you're talking to, or just the oral tradition in your cultural background.
I don't know. I always saw my biggest influence in the poets of the Spanish Civil War.
Like Blas de Otero?
In the Spanish Civil War. Miguel Hernández, Blas de Otero, yeah. As a child, I memorized all Gustavo Adolfo Becker. I was totally in love with the drawing on the cover of the book, of his anthology, his complete works. And I had the Romantics also writing about things that are happening to them right then, and they have this urgency because they have this connection with the feelings and the world, right? I've never thought about that.
I was also thinking if you, and I'm just, this is a hypothesis, but before you write the poetry, do you talk about it?
Oh, I don't write, I walk. I walk with a poem, I take showers with a poem, and then there is a moment in which is like, this is a poem, let me write it. Okay. And so once I do it, I don't go back to it. But I live with these poems, they're part of me. That's why I don't write so much either, because I don't make time. It's different from writing prose or writing essays, and they are there with me, and there is a moment in which they are on a page, but they have lived in my body for a while, and my mind, and yeah.
So that's like your editing process.
Yeah. And then once they are on the page, I do very little to them.
The other aspect that I notice reading your poetry is that it feels that everything happens in the body. Like your body is the victim, the witness, the political voice, the activism. You have an ability to present the body. And I would like you to read a poem from Volando Bajito called Presa Política.
Political prisoner. How to explain it, mistress prison guard, if you catch me right now in the act, consoling myself for the lack of news from the outside with a fat cylinder of papers protected by plastic wrap and my finger. How to explain it, mistress prison guard, and no, I'm only dreaming of my man. As for the world, if I want, I invent it, and having taken stock of the situation, I accommodate it with pleasure. Why should I deny it? In the two most faithful holes of the hiding place, which is my own body.
I have a couple of questions about Volando Bajito, Little Love Flying, that was translated by Gelvronsky. One is that you invent one verb. The verb is desexiliarse, to de-exile yourself. You ask this question, ¿Cómo me desexilio sin romperme? How do I de-exile myself without breaking? Is it possible to de-exile?
Benedetti, Mario Benedetti, this great Uruguayan poet, invented that word too. I'm not sure if I had seen it in his work because memory is tricky. But I wouldn't claim it as an invention for myself because he is out there all over. It's interesting. I think our bodies can return to those countries where we had been kicked out of faster than our work. It's interesting. That's an observation that is true in my case, and it might be true in the cases of many of the people who were exiled in Latin America. I don't know about the Spanish Civil War, if they returned, their bodies returned, and then their work was acknowledged there many years later. And so this year, and in August, I'm going back to Argentina to teach a postdoctoral course, a class in the university that I attended as a student one day.
In Bahia Blanca?
In Bahia Blanca.
Wow.
So this I see as the last step of my, breaking the exile, because my intellectual, my academic work, my scholarship is returning, is being validated in that place. My poetry returned in 2010. Because there was a poet in my hometown who went online and found Revenge of the Apple and said, your poetry has to come back here, and so he published it. But there are ways of the reparation or retribution, and they go beyond justice. I mean, justice is like step one in these cases for me. But then all these, the return of our work to our land is as a way of desexiliarse, right? Of breaking with that exile. Yeah. Very, very dear to my heart is the work of Evangelina Arce, the mother of Evangelina Arce, this mother from Ciudad Juarez, who started to write. She only went to second grade, but she started to write poetry after her daughter disappeared.
In Ciudad Juarez?
Ciudad Juarez.
Yeah.
And then it was, her daughter was killed, but she's still trying to recover the body and do justice on the case. So her, probably, you'll see, but I want to read one of her poems.
So this is your poem, and then you have...
I have Evangelina Arce's poem, Streets.
Okay.
Okay. Words written for Sylvia. That gentleman with a little notebook in his hand. That gentleman with credentials at his neck. That gentleman wanting to talk with me. He doesn't see Evangelina, doesn't see her, standing the dry ground of her sorrow with the uncertainty of someone who's totally clear, because she is the mother of a disappeared girl who dwelled here just yesterday. And that gentleman wants me to tell him about Bahia Blanca, a city in the center of other winds. The Saturday morning in the Plaza de Armas, Evangelina Arce is ready to take up arms. No one is prophetic in this land, Evangelina. Right now, I'm very busy, sir, and Evangelina knows that she doesn't exist, and yet she is sitting there on top of her scream, and that gentleman doesn't listen to Evangelina the way he doesn't listen to so many others, and Sylvia Arce is here, and now it's Juarez, it's a wad of cloth in the mouth. I know, sir. It becomes routine. It's no longer news, always the same dead ones, but gentleman with little notebook in hand, gentleman with credentials at the neck. Do me a favor, and while I finish copying verses this mother tattooed over the pages of her ochre journal, do me the favor of hearing Evangelina's claim of justice. Listen now and hear before the bones of her daughter demand it. Streets, poem written by Evangelina Arce, Sylvia Arce's mother. We cannot walk the streets of Juarez anymore. because we don't know who is walking behind us, is waiting to attack us. We are offended mothers whose daughters have been kidnapped, who don't know where they've been taken. They're high and mighty people because they work in the government. They think that they can do anything. They seize young girls, rape them, and kill them, throw them in the desert like animals. And because they are federales, no one can punish them. I was attacked because I talked, asked for justice. For this, the government sends them to intimidate us. But fear, we don't feel. Justice is what we want, that they reveal all the crimes against women. This is why we shout for justice. Denouncements were made and ads were displayed all over the world, all over the states, asking for protection and justice that the government has denied us. I cannot shut up. My daughter I want to find. The federales who took her must bring her back. Justice, April 30, 2003. Evangelina Arce.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a vos.